I like to use the toe touch progression almost as a benchmark for all our other corrective exercises. It's one of our go-to moves, and if you've been to an FMS workshop or seen some of our videos or seen me present live or even seen what Greg and the gang do over at TPI, the forward bend, that primal pattern of just hip hinging, is so fundamental, and yet it's so broken in our society. There's a couple of nuances because it's really easy to see the toe touch progression as a magic bullet, but I often find people using the toe touch progression for long periods of time. And that sort of disappoints me because once you break through a pattern, you should easily be able to engineer a workout or a program or a fitness activity that maintains that hip hinge and actually contributes to the metabolism or general fitness of the body as well. So I want to go through some of the pearls of the toe touch progression, and I want you to also realize that these pearls are in almost every big correction that we're doing. From rolling to deep squatting to single leg stance, and many of the things we do when we're sort of engaging your motor control system. So the toe touch progression is a simple and easy thing to coach, but there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot going on. So I got a challenge for you. I'm going to whiteboard everything that's going on in the toe touch progression, so maybe you'll have a slightly greater appreciation for it, and then I'm going to do a live coaching session. Don't watch them together. Watch this and go coach somebody through toe touch progression. And then tune in and watch me do the coaching and see what I did differently and what you did differently, and see maybe if I got to the client or got to the athlete in a little bit different way than you did, because the way I demonstrate the importance of the toe touch progression to you, the pro, and what you communicate to the person going through that anxiety situation. Remember, you're taking somebody who can't do a movement pattern and you're going to shove them into a brand new movement pattern in a very small fraction of time. That's a lot of neural input. You got to be there for them. You got to talk them through it. So if you're just reading to them what I'm saying up here while you're coaching them, you're not coaching them. You're just memorizing all those things that you're supposed to do. So that's helping you, but it's not helping them. So the way I demonstrate the whiteboard talk on toe touch progression, the way I coach, are two completely different things. But let's just go through that. We've got a person right here who's struggling, trying to touch their toes, okay? And there's the kneecap right there, and they're doing the best they can, and like, I haven't touched my toes in 20 years. Well, it's really easy for us to want to coach them through that, but they got a paradigm. The one thing, I don't care where they feel it as long as it's not pain. You could feel it in the high part of your calf, you could feel it in your hamstrings, you could feel it in your low back, you could feel it pull right here. It doesn't really matter to me where you feel it from a fitness, stretch, or exercise standpoint. The fact that you're 18 inches from your toes is what bothers me a bit. And so when I have an opportunity to do this, the very first thing I check is the test that is nicely embedded in the FMS, the active straight leg raise, okay? Now, the active straight leg raise, to me, focuses on the pelvis, and everybody's looking at that up leg. And that's where you feel it. You feel that posterior chain, that hamstring, that gastrocsoleus tension right there. You wouldn't feel that tension if this knee was bent. But you do feel it when that knee is straight because it puts the hip into extension. And that puts the pelvis into a bind, okay? We got one leg trying to go up, one leg trying to remain down. The pelvis is trying to work that out. The pelvis doesn't know whether to posterior tilt and help the up leg or anterior tilt and help the down leg. But the pelvis isn't one fixed bone. It's two, or actually six, but it's two in independent halves, and it wants to move. No matter who I talk with or engage with about this whole problem, one phrase comes up, whether I'm in Europe or whether I'm in US, it's let's level the pelvis. We got to get that pelvis level. Whether you're talking to the fascia guys or the neuromuscular guys, they really like that level pelvis. What are they saying? I want a stable foundation on top of which my head and spine sort of find their homeostasis or their balance point. So we want to level that pelvis. Now, there's a lot of different ways to see a level pelvis. We can just sit here and watch your body up against a grid and try to look at static posture. We can try to look at leg length discrepancy and all those things, but many of those are static measures. What really matters to me is when you start moving. And this is an isolated movement. We can put a microscope on it. If one leg raise is here, okay, and you do the other one and the leg raise is here, you've got an asymmetry by FMS standards, and we could call it a 2-3 asymmetry, a 1-2 asymmetry. Either way, the sides aren't matched. When I have this situation, that's a no-no. And here, let me write that up there. No, no. Why? Because if I've got an asymmetry here, then I've already got a reason for that pelvis not to be level. Or it may be showing me how unlevel it is. Doing a symmetrical activity on an asymmetry doesn't make a lot of sense, which is why many sports create natural asymmetry when you throw or kick. It's not a problem if all you do is throw and kick and run around. It's a problem when we start putting greater than body weight loads on you and asking you to move symmetrically in strength conditioning when everything you've ever done is an asymmetry. So the complicating factor in asymmetries in sports is not the fact that the sport can't handle the asymmetry, it's the fact that your deadlifts, your squats, and all your symmetrical push presses and cleans are off a symmetrical platform, a symmetrical power paradigm, and yet you have asymmetry. So if we leveled people before we did strength training, or if we didn't do quite as much strength training, we may see those natural things go. How do you know how much strength training to do? Look at performance. If strength is the reason they're not performing well, then a little bit of strength should demonstrate its utility at performance. So the very first thing I'm going to do is look at that active straight leg raise and make sure that each side is level. But I've got another problem. What if each side is just really, really limited, like a 1 on the leg raise? Because obviously, I didn't come past my knee. Below the knee is a 1 on the straight leg raise. And let's say I do that on each side. I got a 1-1. That's a lot of tone. It's just basically the person's been holding themselves up with all the wrong muscles all day. I still don't want that person here because guess what? Their tightest segment is the last thing to stretch and their weakest segment is the first thing to stretch. I don't want to do that either. So I might go to the FMS library and grab something like a leg lowering progression. It works wonders temporarily, meaning I can get you from a 1-1 to a 2-2 very, very quickly. How long will it last, Gray? Just long enough for me to get you over here. That's all the long it has to last because this right here is not functional. It's laying on your back, lifting your leg because somebody said to. It has no purpose in it at all for you. So once I get you to the 2-2, at least I know I've got the muscle tone, posterior chain, anterior chain, semi-balanced, at least balanced enough to get over here. Now, let's see what's going to happen when I put you in this toe touch progression. The very first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have you on a ramp or a block, okay? And I'm going to have you try to touch your toes. But where's the stress point? Right here. I am stretching that gastroc soleus, but I'm doing more than that. I'm also shifting your weight backward. You have no choice. If you choose not to shift your weight backward, there's going to be a problem. So I'm forcing you backward in your stance. I'm getting a little bit of a hip shift. I'm also forcing you to use more dorsiflexion than you would before. Now, most people only see it from this version. I'm not really trying to coach how much you bend here, but there's one thing that I often see people doing in a toe touch progression, and that's head in that position. Well, if the rest of the spine is flexing, why are we looking up? Well, they're looking up because you won't stop running your mouth or you won't give them permission to look down. I want their eyes looking at the exact same point of the weight shift. Well, when we bring their eyes down and really get them to breathe, I want their eye looking right at the towel roll or foam roll they have. Now, let's look at this from the front. There's your pelvis. Okay, I want your feet as close together as possible. It's very hard for people to stick something between their knees when their feet are close unless you give them permission to flex. And when we stick something between their knees, it can be at the level of the knee joint, slightly below or slightly above, wherever it's comfortable, but I need just a slight outward pressure for you to squeeze into. Squeezing in does a couple of things. Number one, that fixed foot position. Feet got to be touching. That allows me to get my tibia to line up with my femur a little bit better. We also, by squeezing, bias the IT band. Now, as we're going down, whether the toes are lifted or whether the heels are lifted, I need you to squeeze this. When you bend down, you're going to reach a barrier. The very first thing you want to do is squeeze that roll. That's going to give you either full resolution of your problem or partial. It's going to pick up something. Once you've gone that far, I'm going to allow you to bend your knees and squat down while still squeezing. When you come back up, and this is the most important part, most people just come up like this and go right back down. That is not where we are. I want you reaching tall, okay? So I need you reaching your hands as high and tall as possible. This challenges people's balance too, because remember, I've set you back on your heels. You're going to have to hold your feet together and reach tall. Now, you're going to go through the toe touch. Here's another thing. Can we incorporate breathing here? Yes. Extension likes breath in. Flexion likes breath out, okay? But I'm going to give you one other drill. Once they've done a few of these and the breath is out, while they're down, their eyes are looking back and through. I don't care whether their knees are bent or not, but I do care they must touch their toes every time. This is some psychology here. You will touch your toes every time, regardless of whether you hip hinge or squat to get there. It is more important for you to get to your toes because you've never been there before, and then the way you get to your toes, we will coach. Some people will need more of the squat, some people will need less, depending on what's going on. As you're breathing, once I get you down and touching your toes, whether your knees are bent or not, I want you to cycle at least one breath down there, thus sending a signal through your central nervous system that all is good and we can live here. Many people, if you don't check, will be holding their breath and just bouncing off that toe touch because they think, well, all I got to do is get to those toes. No, you got to own those toes. You got to be here and you got to breathe here. So after about 3 touches, I'm going to get you to inhale and exhale and really ping your neurological system because breath tells us everything's okay. In yoga, they teach that. You get to a position, you feel a barrier. Do you push through it or breathe through it? You frickin' breathe through it. That's what we got to do here. So incorporating all those things we know about visual acquisition, about getting that entire spine to flex, about cycling your breath to sync with your movement. A lot of good stuff happens here. So for you in the SFMA, whether I'm working on your rotation, your backward bend, your forward bend, or your single leg stance, this is one of the things I do. How about the knee patient that doesn't have full knee extension? This gets them to use that full knee extension in a very functional way. How about people who have lateral hamstring tightness or basically turning that foot out and overpronating? It's impossible. When I touch your feet together and put you in that neurological arch, your arch comes up. If I let your feet spread out, you lose the arch. But if I put your feet together and stick your tibia out just a bit, your arch and architecture come right up. So on a good foot platform, you are basically challenging the posterior chain. Now, what happens when we switch that? Okay? The wedge is back here. Now I've tilted you forward. But there's another dilemma. Your leg is almost 2 inches longer than it was. One of my favorite wedges to use is about 12 inches long by 5 to 6 inches tall. It's really easy on the foot. You can do this barefoot or in shoes. If you choose to use a 2-inch block and put their foot up on it or put their toe up on it, that's good too, but just realize this is probably going to be more comfortable in shoes, and sometimes I think this drill works better in bare feet. Now, as they're doing this, we sync the breath, we sync the back, we reach for the toe, we tell them that a bend in the knee is okay, and we run this whole thing. And now you've done toe touch progression. You did it in a right sequence. You're going to see me coach it, but I want to see what you do with it first, and yet I've got one other thing I want you to know. I'm going to draw this line on the board, and I want you to hold it in your mind the rest of the time you're doing this drill. This is an unbelievable way to get one of the most primitive hip hinging patterns synced back with your neurological system, to give you sort of a breakthrough, if you will. It's amazing to see people in 3 minutes who haven't touched their toes learn to touch their toes. But unless they use this as sort of a daily kata or a daily routine to get that. And one of the ways I say is, listen, don't leave the house in the morning if you can't touch your toes, and don't go to bed at night if you can't touch your toes. And it's going to take less than 3 minutes, because the first time you ever did it, it only took us 3 minutes. So it's less than a 3-minute investment. Now, the more you can do this, the quicker this behavior will replace the bad behavior of QL, hamstring, calf tightness that you've been walking around with all your life. We've got a good thing and we've got a good habit. What I want you to be thinking of is, what are you going to do after that? Because you just defragged the hard drive. You just opened up that lumbopelvic rhythm in a very simple and primal pattern. What are you going to do with it? Because essentially, after this drill, the pelvis is a little bit more level. Do you want to explore rotation? Do you want to try to train single leg stance? Well, don't coach them in single leg stance. Have them walk a balance beam back and forth. Have them walk that same beam before they touch their toes. Have them walk it after. Use the motor control. This is not a lot of motor control, and it's in a static foot position. There's no locomotion here. There's locomotion there. So once you loosen this up, you got to keep telling yourself, what do I want to do with this? Well, since it looks like a deadlift, a lot of people just use it as a warm-up for a deadlift. I use it with my total knee and hip patients prior to going to the balance beam. I use it for people who have too much tension in their upper body because they've got their pelvis dumped forward and they're holding themselves up with their traps. So a lot of people who have a lot of trap and shoulder tightness, I'll do this, and then all of a sudden what? Shoulder mobility looks better. Where are you holding your tension, and how much of that tension can you hold in this drill? Not much. You got to let a lot of stuff go to do this pattern, and you're a blank slate. What am I going to do with this blank slate? Am I going to go something for gait? Am I going to go something for upper body reaching? Am I going to go for half kneeling, static stability? I can do anything. All the tall and half kneeling holds and turns we do with kettlebells, that works great on a more level pelvis. So once you start seeing an exercise like this that I use for a lot of different things, if I have an elderly person with a balance problem, I don't send them home in a doorway doing this. I send them home doing this, with a chair on each side of them, and they're just slowly negotiating their AP balance before they work on left-right. It's pretty good with these feet close together because you get almost a 50-50 weight distribution. The further I let you spread your feet, the more you can favor one foot, thus bringing an asymmetry to a symmetrical pattern. Now, you're going to have an opportunity to see me coach this, but you will learn more from that if you go try to do one first, making sure all this happens without telling them what's happening, because they're not interested. They're interested in touching their toes. Let them do that. You help them have a breakthrough. What I want you thinking about is, what are you doing after? Are you going to do an exercise? Are you going to do a drill? Are you going to do a challenge? And did you set a baseline to demonstrate to them, did this make that easier? Because if it did, a 2-minute investment made a 10-minute exercise or a 5-minute drill easier, it's worth it, okay? Abraham Lincoln once said, if you have a half hour to chop wood, spend 15 minutes sharpening your axe. I think sometimes we chop a lot of wood with a dull axe. If you know why you're doing something and then you develop that interaction to coach it well, that's sharpening the axe. And you'll cut just as much in half the time, and that's what gives us a competitive advantage. Not because we wear a banner that says FMS, because we do it.
For more information, visit functionalmovement.com.